There we go.
Um, yeah, very good, Maureen. Thanks again, and the time's all yours.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I was really excited when Jeff asked me to talk about family history and kids. I have kids, and I've lectured in the classroom and done some workshops, and so it's just a really fun activity to do with kids, all kinds of kids. And I also use the methods presented in this webinar to talk to kids about local history as well, because local history and family history and all of that stuff gets all mixed together. And the title of this talk is really, is my pet frog part of my family? And that is actually a question asked of me by a second grader several years ago. And so I take a broad-based approach to kids and family history. I want them to be excited about the topic. And so we, play with the rules a little bit and don't necessarily define family as just the members living in our household. It's an extended family, and it can also be the pets in the family for them. Now, obviously, you're not going to trace them in a genealogy, but wait till you see what some of these kids have come up with. I do artistic presentations with them. So we start with the basics. I start with the basics every time, no matter if it's a second grade class or a high school class or a young adult class. I talk about, how do you get started with family history? And these are for parents and grandparents and for teachers. And it's all about talking with family and looking at things that you have at home. The same ways that you start researching your family tree are the same components that make kids interested in family history. And we'll go through all these different things and you'll see what I mean. I like to learn the facts through research, but I also like to stress that family history is all about telling the story. So let's just look at what is genealogy. Now, obviously, genealogy in a narrow definition is the bloodline of your family or the genetic history of your family, that DNA. So it's a mixture of family and science. And then how do you tell that family history or that genealogy? What method do you use to do that? Do you use words or artwork or graphs or timelines? There's all kinds of ways that you can encourage kids to explore the world of family history. I had a teacher way back in school now who told me that life was all about the questions that you asked and answered, and the things that you wrote about were all about answering questions. Who, what, where, when, and how. I think this was one of the English classes I took when I was a kid, but it has stuck with me. If there's one thing that that teacher taught me, and it certainly wasn't diagramming sentences, it was how to tell the story. So when you think about that who, what, where, when, and how, you answer questions like, who is in your family? What are their names? Where are they from? When were they born? And then you find out the facts. And so kids can answer these questions. They can answer who's in their family. They know. What are their names? Where are they from? They probably know all of this information. When they were born, however, is a fact that they will probably turn to an adult for help with. And then they want to find out other facts as well. So I always start with questions. Now, some of the things presented in this lecture are intended for use in schools, and some of them are intended for use at home, and some of them work whether you're in the classroom or at home or leading a workshop. And these are some of the things I've done over the years, which is turning a long car ride into a storytelling opportunity. We have long commutes here in the Northeast, and it's not the length of the drive, it's the traffic. And it gives us an opportunity to say, well, there's a car from such and such a state. Have you ever been there? What are we going to talk about? What's there, do you think? Do you have any stories you want to tell me about what's the funniest thing that ever happened to you in the classroom? And then it gives you a an opportunity to say, this is the funniest thing that's ever happened to me. And then what's the funniest thing to ever happen in our family? Or what's the funniest thing to ever, and then the adult gets to say the funniest or the most significant thing that ever happened in the family overall. Now you can also play a game, and when my kids were little, they really liked this. We'd go in the kitchen, and my kids were kind of active, and so getting them to focus on things that we were doing in the kitchen was important. And so I would play a game. What's in this kitchen that was part of your grandmother's childhood? And they would point to things like the microwave, and I'd say, nope, I didn't even have a microwave when I was a kid. And of course that would make them gasp and think I was a total dinosaur. And they would point to all kinds of electronics, and I would say, no, your grandmother had very basic things in her kitchen. And so obviously all grandmothers have different things in their kitchen, but it's a fun thing to do. You can pull utensils out of the drawer and say, what is this for, and what do you think it was used for in the past? And we'll talk about ways to incorporate activities in the kitchen into family history. In order to inspire the young genealogist, I like to keep art supplies on hand. I have sort of an art supply closet with construction paper and crayons and paints and stencils and all kinds of things that you'll see in use in this presentation. And then I also like to show classrooms of kids historical depictions of family trees and ask them to create their own. And you won't believe what these kids do with this. They take a traditional family tree, which usually starts with the immigrant ancestor, like a beautiful 19th century family tree that I'll show you in a minute. And then they go off and they interpret it in modern ways. One of the kids in one of my classes did the sweetest thing. He did clouds in the sky as the members of his family that were no longer living, and footprints on the beach for the people in his family that were still living. And it was just really wonderful. And I remember going up to him and saying, what is it that you're doing, and why is it this? And he goes, well, these are the people up in the sky, and then these are the people walking along the beach. And another kid did a pile of leaves instead of the tree, so that the immigrant ancestor was actually at the top of the tree, and all of the living family was at the top of the tree, the top of the pile, and all the living family were leaves along the bottom of the pile. It is sort of a family tree. And here's the sort of art supplies spread out all over the table. And I give them little workshops, and you can see I have stickers and crayons and stencils and colored paper and scrapbook materials, anything they might need to create, because every kid has a different level of a different comfort level with art materials. I had a little boy in one of my classes who just refused to do anything artistic, but when I showed him some stencils, suddenly that was something that he could do. He just wasn't comfortable drawing. He wasn't confident enough about his drawing. And here's somebody that's got a beautiful tree started. So genealogy is in and out of the classroom. Anything I present today, teachers can use these tips to teach family history and to teach history as well. Scout leaders can use this material for appropriate marriage badges, and we'll talk about some of what those are in just a little bit. Let's focus for just a moment on what's happening in a classroom. Your kid gets, or your grandchild comes home with that family history assignment. There have been articles written in the New York Times and other magazines about how controversial the family history assignment is, because some kids feel left out. It's sensitive. They have things in the family that family members and relatives would rather not talk about, but it is educational. So I like to expand that family history assignment and give kids the option of not necessarily researching just their family tree, but suppose they have a famous person in history that they want to learn more about, and talking about their family and their family history. There's lots of resources online for this kind of thing. You have to always be sensitive to the non-traditional child. Not everyone lives in a two-parent household. You have to, lots of kids in one-parent households, children in foster care, and there are adoption issues as well. So while genealogy is traditionally about genetics, I try to make the assignment available for everyone and make it inclusive so no one feels like they don't belong. Here actually is a scrapbook page that represents a family tree of an adoptive family. Obviously this is an open adoptive family. And so the child is in the middle, in the center flower with the little yellow sticker on it. And then one side of the tree is the birth family and one side of the tree is the adoptive family. So I have an all-inclusive family tree. If you are a teacher and you assign a family history project, you're invariably going to get questions from parents. You just have to be very clear about what the assignment is and isn't. It doesn't have to be the 12 generations of the family back to the beginnings of this country. Again, outline your expectations, the depth of the assignment, and how the information will be used. And have the kids stick to the assignment as closely as possible, whether they're researching a famous person or whether they're researching someone in their family tree. And it's important to remind parents, I see this all the time in workshops I do in public libraries. We're all genealogists. We love genealogy, but it's important to not get carried away with all of the specifics when you're talking with a small kid. These projects that I recommend are to be done by a child with some adult help, some adult guidance, but certainly a kid isn't going to understand a 10-generation chart necessarily. So here's how I start. Second grade is basically where I begin talking to kids about family history, and I explain Ma and Pa, which is basically the maternal line, their mother's line, and the paternal line, which is their father's line. And then I talk about family tree charts, which of course so many of us are doing genealogy online these days that you don't necessarily use a standard fill-in-the-blank pedigree chart, but you could, and it's a great thing to send home with kids. You can get free examples of these pedigree charts on FamilyTreeMagazine.com, for instance, and some other websites. So pedigree actually means the foot of a crane, and you could show pictures of what the crane looks like, the bird, and what its foot looks like, and then explain how that then becomes the pedigree chart with the child, the first person, and then working backwards from there. And you really only have to go back a couple of generations. I like to introduce history into family history, or genealogy, I should say, because I use the more inclusive family history term. And I like kids to think about their own lives. So going online or to my public library, find out what the history of their name is. What does their name mean? Why were they named that? They named after someone in the family, or what's the story behind that name? It's a great introduction to talking about, well, what's Dad's name mean, and why is he named that, and on and on. It does really get the conversation going. And if kids really aren't interested in the history of their name, or there's not a whole lot of material there, you can have them research things like how did the community get its name? Because here in New England, for instance, the community's changed names several times, and so there's almost a genealogy of the community names. And it can be fun. I like to encourage artistic pursuits. Of course, I deal with photographs all the time, so I think in pictures, and I think all the time about how to convey things in a visual fashion. So I keep a little box. It's like my little travel box. Sometimes I call it my sort of Mary Poppins bag. And for a long time, and in some places, some scrapbook stores, you can still get them. They're little paper dolls, and they come in different sizes, and they come with little clothes that you can dress up, and that you can put faces on them, and they come with little pieces of hair